Welcome back to Conquerors through Christ. I'm Mike, pastor and the chairman of CTC, and we're so glad that you're here for perhaps the most important step of all. It's step 2. It's called getting back to God's grace. Do you know the story of the Samaritans? The Bible says that about 3,000 years ago, one of the kings of Israel made the city of Samaria his capital, and it quickly turned into a capital and a center of every kind of sin. There was child sacrifice in Samaria, temple prostitution, sexual impurity, and depravity of every kind. Things got so bad that a few hundred years later, after nothing had changed, God allowed a foreign army to come in and to destroy the city of Samaria. And then it got even worse. That foreign invader implanted some of his people who brought even worse sins, and the sexual sin increased to an almost unbelievable level. By the time Jesus came around 2,000 years ago, people thought of Samaritans as the worst kind of people on the planet, filled with guilt and shame and lust and depravity. There was nothing worse than to be called a Samaritan. If you've struggled with pornography, maybe you felt a little bit like a Samaritan. You may have a long history of guilt and shame and sexual depravity. You may think that the people who are really godly would want nothing to do with your life, especially not Jesus, especially not God Himself. But you'd be wrong. You see, there's this line in the Bible that maybe you've missed before. Jesus and His disciples were traveling, and this little verse says, now Jesus had to go through Samaria. And if you know the history, you say, no, actually He didn't. He could have done what every other Jewish person did and avoid Samaria completely. But Jesus had to go through Samaria because He cared about the Samaritans, and He believed that God's grace was big enough to even reach people like that. So one day Jesus walks into Samaria, and who does He find? Not just any Samaritan, but one of the worst of the worst. She's ostracized by the other Samaritans for the way that she's lived. She's been divorced 5 times. She's shacking up and sleeping with a guy who's not her husband. And here when she comes walking to this well, there Jesus is sitting, the Son of God. He's sinless. And what does He say to her? He doesn't condemn her. He talks with her. And He offers her something that no one else in the world had ever offered her, the grace and the forgiveness of God. The woman could barely believe it. When Jesus' disciples came back and saw Him talking to a woman like that, they could barely believe it, but that was the reason that Jesus came into this world, to find Samaritans just like that. And the same is true for you. You may think that if you came face to face with Jesus, He would shake His head in anger, that He would make you feel ashamed, that He would bring back all the guilt that you deserve. He would be so angry for the things you've done, but you don't understand God. Our God is a God of grace. Jesus said He came into this world to seek and to save what was lost. That means if you feel lost in the sin, Jesus came into this world just for a person like you. You may feel like a Samaritan with so much shame and guilt, but Jesus said that He came into this world for sinful people just like that. Jesus came into this world for you, and He loved you so much, He did what no one else would do. He died to take away your sin. There on the cross, all the shame that you should feel for your past, Jesus took it away. And all the guilt that you and I should have to carry before God, Jesus died so that we could have a clean conscience and be right in God's sight. Every bit of our sin, all of the past, Jesus wiped it away. And on the cross, when He cried out, "It is finished," it was. Not just for good people, but for Samaritans, for you and for me. And now God doesn't see you as a Samaritan. He sees you as one of His children that He dearly loves. God doesn't see you as depraved or unclean or twisted or dirty. Instead, God sees you as cleansed, as holy, as sanctified, as blameless, and as pure. Because you conquered that sin? No, because Jesus conquered it for you. And because of Jesus and His cross, the Bible says stunningly beautiful things about you. One of my favorites is in the Old Testament, where God says, "I will forgive your wickedness, and I will remember your sin no more." Can you even believe that? Because of Jesus, God doesn't even remember your sin. You may have fallen into temptation last night, but because of Jesus, God doesn't remember that. And you maybe looked at those websites 1,000,000 times, but because of Jesus, God doesn't remember that. He looks at you because of His Son Jesus, and He says, "You are my child. And you are clean, and you are holy, and you are blameless, and you are sinless, and you are pure, and you are a saint in my sight." God looks at you, and His face beams with pleasure because you've done it all right? No, because Jesus did. That's the grace of God. Now, I need you to click the link below on this website so that you can see all the beautiful things that God says about you. that you are redeemed, justified, holy, blameless, pure, a saint, a child of God, one of God's people, his children, his flock, you need to immerse yourself in God's grace. Because the Bible says that grace will compel you. It will be your motivation to do the things you have felt powerless in the past to do. Oh, one last thing. Before Jesus went back into heaven, he told his disciples that they would be witnesses of God's grace, that they would start in Jerusalem and then move out to Judea, and then they would go to, you guessed it, Samaria. And so here I am today, one of God's witnesses, a witness of his grace. And there you are, feeling ashamed like a Samaritan. And here I am to tell you, it is by grace that you have been saved, through faith in Jesus. And this isn't from yourselves, it's a gift of God. That's God's gift to you today, his grace. Take that step, get back to God's grace every day, and you'll find a power to live for him as you never have before.